Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and of course we've got Mike Simmons here, but we have two special guests. Mike Connor has been gone so long he feels like a special guest. Welcome back, Mike Connor.
Thank you, Jody. I noticed that productivity didn't slip, so I'm thinking about taking more vacation, so we shall see.
Our second special guest is Drew D'Agostino. Mike Simmons, tell us about Drew and why he's a guest on the show.
Well, first off, Drew, thanks for being able to join. Drew is someone we've worked with for a little bit over a year now, and we've gotten such great feedback on the guests that we've brought onto the show and insight that they're delivering out to our audience that we asked Drew if he was available to attend and join the conversation, and really excited to have him on board. Drew, can you go ahead and introduce yourself? Give us a little bit of your background and where you've come from, et cetera.
Sure, Mike. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Drew D'Agostino. I'm the founder of Crystal. We're a software company that has a product that can tell you anyone's personality. And we've been around for a little under 3 years now, based in Nashville, Tennessee, and backed by some great investors, and just kind of been steadily growing. We're working with both the Mikes for a little while now, and just kind of focused on growing our company.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. How about a little bit of background on Crystal? Like, what's the business? Why'd you decide to build it? Help us there.
Yeah. So Crystal is at the core based on a pretty simple premise, and that's empathy. It's based on the idea that you can communicate better and have better relationships if you understand the person that you're communicating with. So the way we're kind of attacking that is by giving people access to personality profiles. So what Crystal does is it analyzes data that people have written about themselves, either online or in emails. And we use machine learning to predict their personality. And we use a framework called DISC. A lot of people are probably familiar with it. Once we can accurately predict someone's DISC profile, we can make a lot of good assumptions about how to communicate with them and how they like to work, how you can persuade them, what their preferences are around emails they receive, etc. And the whole idea being, if you understand someone's personality, you can have a much more effective conversation with them. And pretty much in any job that relies on communication for your success, it can improve outcomes. So that's the basic premise of Crystal, what we're building a company around. And what we've done over the last couple of years is build this large database of a couple 100 million personality profiles with an average accuracy of around 85%. And we have some tools for Gmail and LinkedIn and Salesforce that help people in sales and recruiting and management communicate better.
So I think that sets a good foundation for our discussion today. And one of the reasons why I really found Crystal interesting, probably going back to the days where you were just at concept phase. I know Luke from our prior lives together. And I remember when Luke and I worked together at a previous company, and he'd contacted me about the concept of Crystal. And I had been using DISC and other behavioral assessment tools and things like that for a long time. And he said, hey, what do you think about this idea of being able to predict personalities versus having to go through the old process, which is have people fill out surveys, get the results back, do the analysis. It was really a cumbersome process for decades. But I also saw the value in what you get from this information. And when he told me, yeah, we're going to figure out a way to do this using machine learning and automating that process, immediately I scratched my head and I thought, how would that even be possible? But what I told Luke was, I said, if you figure it out, give me a call, because I think that could really be an interesting play in the market because of the value that tools like these deliver. So I was really excited to get that phone call about a year ago where he said, hey, I think we might actually, have this figured out and we're ready to really do some exciting things with this. And so we've been working with Drew and his team to really find sort of that product market fit. And it's been exciting to see the development and the pace of development that you guys have been able to achieve. I think a lot of companies talk about being agile and moving very quickly. And I think you guys are a great example of a company that's listening to the market and iterating and developing very, very quickly. So yeah, I think this is really relevant, and where it fits in with our audience and the people that we help is that we're about that thinking process, the equipping salespeople to think about how they communicate, how they engage with people, and improve those relationships. And you use the word empathy and communicating, like a human being. There's a lot of talk right now about using AI to almost replace the salesperson's role in a relationship. But the bottom line is, it seems that these tools that actually enhance that experience, I think, are going to be the ones that win, long term.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. I mean, so we're tend to. It's been interesting. So you mentioned we move really fast. I think that's a core tenet of our company, and not just like culturally, but also just the strategy we need to have. Because we're working in a brand new market. It's not like we're going after some big existing software platform and giving them a better version of it. So that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because we can go into most conversations as a really new, innovative way to think about communication. And we tend to generate buzz, both just like publicly and internally because of that, because what we do is pretty cool. It's a curse in that we can't just like say, here's this current budget that you're spending for an existing software platform, and then here's what you can replace it with Crystal. So the reason we have to iterate so quickly is because we've got a really solid core technology and good ways to integrate it, with these into the workflow for individuals. But we really are still experimenting in how to best package this for companies so they can get the most business value out of this kind of data. Because it's a new class of data that wasn't really available before. So there's like reason for our organized chaos. Basically, we tend to learn by moving really quickly and getting things out to market fast. Since the beginning, that's really how our company's developed. We do very little marketing, a lot of just pushing product and seeing how people respond to it. And that's really guided our development so far. On your point about sales tools or human-focused sales tools, that's something that really also resonates with me. When people look at Crystal in the market and the companies that we tend to get grouped with AI companies, people that say we're going to save salespeople time by using AI and apply it to meetings, or apply it like scheduling or writing emails and increasing the amount of calls that salespeople can do per day, or using AI to predict effectiveness, lead scoring, all this kind of stuff. All really good, useful things. But when it comes to like communication, what I've found, what you probably found as somebody that receives sales emails, is when we're over-tooled and salespeople tend to rely too heavily on automation, it tends to dilute the effectiveness of individual touch points. And the trend that I've been seeing in the market, because I just talked to a lot of the people, like the decision makers that receive emails themselves, as well as the ones that are in charge of how their own sales teams are communicating. Man, it seems like just the sheer amount of automation and emails that are going out, and all the canned responses, and even the little robots that people sense they're talking to now, I think it's killing email. And it's an issue because then it makes every other sales rep's job harder. So while we tend to get grouped with these AI companies, I actually see us on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're trying to help people be more human, using technology to get people a better human understanding of each other, to make this online communication experience more like a traditional, like in-person, we are two people talking to each other and can pick up cues from each other type of experience. And that is a big, lofty goal, and we're going to fighting against, I think, a technological wave, but I think one that really needs to happen. So I usually refer to it as Crystal. Crystal is an antidote for email anxiety. People definitely have. So
nice. So Drew, what works in communication today, or what works in communication in general?
So just, I mean, and this is all just coming from me as a person that happens to think about this a lot and has done a lot of research in the area, but then also just human beings. I think we've got an intuition for what works. On that end, I draw a lot of inspiration from just timeless concepts, like Dale Carnegie kind of stuff, that you can basically earn somebody's trust by being interested in them, get them talking about themselves, take the focus off of yourself and what you want, and really focus on what other people want. Things like remembering people's names and details about them, that works in communication. And those are not groundbreaking concepts. Those are just things that go against our own self-interested nature, and we just constantly have to remember it. So Crystal for me is just a reminder. Remember that this other person is like a human being and has individual thoughts, feelings, motivations, and they are probably different than you. So on like the just pure common sense side, I mean, that's what Crystal's all about. On the more scientific end of things, we run tests with Crystal through email segmentation and splitting up by personality and seeing how people respond specifically to email, but also getting ideas for effectiveness through sales reps that are using our tool on the phone and in meetings. And there are tons of little cues that are baked into our product that are based on those observations. For example, recognizing that people have different personalities. You're talking to somebody who is an I in their disc type. We know that people who have that personality type are far more likely to respond favorably to an email that starts with, "Hey, Mike," as opposed to "Hello, Mike."
Yep.
Very subtle cue. But when you're talking about an I, you are basically, by saying "Hello, Mike," you're informing them that they are in a more formal situation than they are comfortable with naturally.
And I know we'll share with the audience some information around DISC, and you've got some materials on your website about DISC, but you had mentioned I. What's I stand for?
Yeah, so DISC is this really simple framework. It's developed about 100 years ago for identifying different behavior styles. And it's based on these 4 letters, D, I, S, and C. And the basic concept is that everybody has some combination of these 4 key styles in their personality. And it's just the differences between people is which ones are dominant and which ones are not. So somebody who is a D is likely to be very assertive up front. That communication style is they communicate really with brief sentences, and they tend to sound demanding when they're writing text messages or emails.
We don't know anybody like that.
No one. An I is someone who, if you're communicating with them for the first time, they're probably very outgoing, want to tell you stories, want to entertain you. They're at the core, they're motivated by relationships and they want to be liked. An S communication style is the next one. They're much more comfortable listening, and it's going to be somebody who probably comes across as more reserved up front. S stands for steadiness, and they appreciate stability. They like having their expectations set, and they're going to make sure that they plan out their next steps before actually taking them. And a C is the last way around the DISC, and that means conscientiousness, or you can also refer to it as calculated. And a C is going to be somebody who's very factual and logical. So if you're in conversation with them and you're talking to somebody who's very skeptical and seems like they're asking lots of questions, they want to get all the details, you're probably dealing with a C. So those are the 4 styles, and everybody has a combination of them. So you can be a DC or an IDS, and it just stands for, in the order of it, stands for which ones are most dominant in your personality. So based on those combinations, you can break things up into like 16 or 64 different types. And that's what Crystal's based on, breaking up those different communication styles and helping you communicate better with each of them.
And where you can have some fun with this is when you actually go through that process and you find out, not to pick on Mike Simmons, but let's just use Mike as a real example. So we'll follow up with an I example, but Mike being what I would call a capital D, I would say he gravitates very, very heavily into the D mode. And it's sometimes, and this is the fun side of Crystal, because once you internalize it and you start working with it and you realize what people's strengths are and where they have gaps, I'll encourage Mike to integrate a little more I in some of his email communication that's going out to a client of ours. Or if I hear him in a meeting when the 2 of us are together and he's just chomping at the bit and being really, really direct, things like that, we can give each other coaching cues. And I think that just becomes part of our process. But then you also learn to appreciate the D, or Mike appreciates my I. You know, when we go to a group setting and we're meeting with a client that's a hugger, I know I'm going to have to probably be the first one to to make that happen. And Mike will kind of lay back and try and skip the hugs. But on a more serious note, it kind of getting back to something you mentioned one thing I really liked is this idea that the amount of volume that we're seeing in email and the amount of volume and the things that, and this drives us nuts, right? We're part of the problem being in the sales profession, in that we know a lot of companies, that's how they measure reps. They encourage volume. They're looking for tools to actually increase that volume, it's always about how do we scale? How do we do more? How do we pour gas on it? And I think one of the things we do at Catalyst is we say, hey, slow down a little bit here. I would rather have really effective communication engagement with a handful of people during a business day than go out and spray messages to 1,000 people and hope that a few of them actually respond. And unfortunately, the easy thing you can do to satisfy volume requirements is just do more of it and do it mindlessly. And I agree with what you were saying, Drew, is that if you're going to differentiate yourself and if you're going to be successful, thinking about what you're saying and how you're connecting as a human being to another human being in an organization is what I think even right now will set you apart, because there's so much reliance on canned emails and autoresponders and things like that. So I definitely think you guys are onto something. And I think we share that as a common value, that we're not about trying to increase the volume and do things faster and cheaper and all that stuff. It's about how do we equip salespeople, which leads me to my next sort of idea or thing we should talk about that I find really exciting about what Crystal's doing is making Crystal available in our normal workflow. So things that I personally get a lot of value from, being able to, when I'm in LinkedIn, being able to look at profiles. Right now we've activated in our contacts in HubSpot. We have basically the API connected so that we see personality information on the contacts we have. So what I've seen you guys do is really integrate well into workflow tools that we live in, and maybe without getting too far ahead of ourselves as far as sharing things that maybe are ready or not ready or whatever, but maybe just have you talk a little bit about that, about how you're integrating into workflows and making those workflows more effective versus being yet another thing in the sales stack that is going to drive salespeople nuts.
Yeah. This comes back to where do you get that point of value from Crystal? And that's just like, we know that this gold is there because of the way Crystal spreads. It spreads virally in companies. And there's just this like nugget of magic. For 2 years, I've been trying to dig and just really put to words what exactly that nugget is. I've figured it out just from my own sales conversations because I use Crystal all the time when I'm talking with customers. And to me, the nugget of value is not like the way you measure other sales tools, where you plug this thing into Salesforce, say, and then you're looking at a response rate increase, and you're saying, "Oh, okay, this increased our response rate 13%. That means this is good, great." We are working on ways to measure Crystal that way. We haven't done a super great job of it yet, just mostly because we haven't been doing things at scale. It's been mostly one-to-one communication. So, I mean, measuring things in the workflow and their effectiveness, like quantitatively, is important. But the magic really happens when you use Crystal before you're meeting someone or before you're sending the communication. And then you realize that, wow, this is right. And I connected with this person in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. That still happens to me all the time. For example, I'm looking at so my most frequently used integration is on LinkedIn because I am a very active LinkedIn user. And before I talk to somebody, I want to learn about them and find as much as I can in a couple minutes. So I'll look up regular LinkedIn information. I'll pull up the Crystal profile. And I know at this point, because I'm very in tune with my own like strengths and flaws when it comes to this communication stuff, I know who I'm going to be able to connect with like easily. If I see someone on there who's an I, like I'm a natural S. So S's and I's get along really, really well because I am happy to let someone just chat my ear off. I'd love listening to them. I want to ask them questions about their dog. If I'm in a situation, now I can be a D at work, but if I'm in that situation and I'm going on a sales call with someone who I need to connect with, I know that if I talk to an I, I'm going to be able to basically make them feel really good about our meeting. Now there's the other situation where I see someone who's like a strong C. And before Crystal, I would go into the conversation. I'd be a little bit blindsided because all of a sudden they start asking me all of these questions. I might have not done my homework all the way. And now I feel like I'm being interrogated on the phone. I just want to get off the call and survive until the next meeting. That was my perspective on talking with C's before I knew they were C's. Now that I know that, and I look at Crystal before the meeting, it says this person's very skeptical. They're C. They're likely to ask questions. They're likely to not trust something on the surface. Like that's just their personality. I talk to them, and now it's more of a challenge. I know that I need to have the notes in front of me. I know that I need to get some numbers for any claims I make. I need to pound this person with detail because they need to justify to themselves that they're using their time wisely and that they're making a decision based on data and not feelings, because that's just how they make decisions. Talking to an I, they make feelings with their gut. All you need to do is sell them on a vision, get them excited about it, and you can close the deal. C's, they don't put stock in that. They need to have justification with numbers. So going into a call with a C now, I know that ahead of time. And the magic happens for me when I connect, for me personally, when I can actually connect with a C effectively and I can win them over in the course of a call. And after the call, my feeling is, wow, I'm very glad I had Crystal for that because I went into that meeting prepared. I knew what I was going up against. I knew someone was going to come in and interrogate me. Those are just two examples, like a personality type that I personally sync with really well naturally and one that I don't, and how Crystal helps me. But that extends to anybody. And there are certain correlations of what your type is and who you're likely to just jive with and who you're not. But everybody has them. It's just a wheel, and you happen to, wherever you happen to fall on there, it can dictate who you communicate well with. So that's just my notes from the field and how it integrates with the workflow.
So do D's and I's get along well together?
Yeah. So it's not like such a binary question of like these two types getting along well together. I think any two people can get along well together and any two people can hate each other.
So there's a chance for Mike and I to actually get along at some point in time?
Maybe one day. The question is, what this gives you, it's more of an objective look at natural styles.
Yep.
So a D and an I, completely in their natural styles, if they're not self-aware and they are not adjusting for each other, they can really butt heads, because the I is going to want to pursue I is first of all going to talk the D's ear off, and the D's want to get back to work. The I is going to get very excited about big visions, and the D is all focused on what we can actually do now, because they want to see, or at the end of the day, what's the result going to be. And the I at times is going to feel really offended by the D, because the D is going to come back at them with some blunt, short remark that the D really didn't mean to be mean, but the I just thinks, wow, if I would have said that, that means that I'm angry. Therefore, he must be angry at me. So there's a lot of ways that the D and I's can clash, but if they're self-aware and they adapt to each other and understand the differences, it can be a really great dynamic relationship. D's and I's can create a really a relationship with really high risk tolerance and get things done quickly, get new things done quickly, because they're not held back by analysis. But it's all about recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of the other person.
Yeah. And I think then you can also take it to the next level when you have a high level of trust and empathy for each other, like Mike and I do, where I know what his reaction is going to be when I'm holding the microphone and he's chomping at the bit to say something, and I hold it and I just look at him. You can see the shades of red of his forehead. Like, I just want to say something. I want to say, and I'm just, purposely not giving him the microphones, just having.
That's why this is not a video podcast.
Yeah, this would have been better to do on Periscope or something. But
yeah, I'm watching this play out right before me.
yeah. And you could be the puppet master, and you could do the things that would kind of incite. But
yeah. Once you give the I the microphone, the I is not going to let go, and the D is probably going to interrupt him. So.
And usually we have two microphones. Today we have one, and it's a directional microphone, so I may just sound like a giant echo in a tunnel.
Which is where you want to keep your D's. But hey, okay. So on a serious note, I want to give you an example too, and I don't think I've talked to you about this yet, Drew. But a very practical application that Mike and I use Crystal for, and this is just kind of for the benefit of our audience as well. But we had an opportunity to meet with a new client, about 3 weeks ago. And what that involved was us doing pretty comprehensive interviews with about 34 different people over a span of 3 days. And in the old days, I can tell you as a consultant, one of the things that we did was we actually had people take a DISC-like assessment. And I can tell you that puts people on the defensive. If you say, hey, but you're going to meet a consultant, and they're going to come in and talk to you about what you do, and they're going to, just try and make things better, blah, blah, blah. But by the way, we need you to fill out this personality survey before we have those meetings. I can tell you that puts them in a very, very defensive, and just the anxiety is through the roof, right? And so what I really liked about Crystal, and of course, we were using that for good reason, right? All the things we've talked about. How can I meet this person where they are? How can I communicate with them better? How can I make sure I align the right consultant with the right interviewee? That's what we used it for. But as the recipient of that, you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to do a reorg and I'm going to get profiled and blah, blah, blah. But how Mike and I used it for this meeting was, we know Mike is a D. We know I'm an I. We met with 34 people we don't know. And you described how you use LinkedIn a lot. We use LinkedIn a lot. And the first step we did was we looked at every one of those people that we were going to meet with, looked them up on LinkedIn, looked at what their roles were. And these weren't just salespeople. These were a cross-section of an entire organization. So we had everything from the senior leadership team down to a customer service rep, and then every aspect of that company. But we looked everybody up on LinkedIn to figure out what their role was, what they're responsible for, what their history is. And the first thing we looked at was, tell me a little bit about this person as a human being. And we used the LinkedIn extension and looked up people's profile types using Crystal. And I'll tell you, it helped us in a number of ways. One, we were able to say, okay, if we have to meet these 34 people between Mike and I, which ones do we think we would be most similar to or would be good matches with? In other words, if we had people that were super direct, high D, we would align them with Mike, or Mike Simmons, so that they would be very aware of each other's style and probably meet each other very, very well. And then we looked for places where we used your conflict report, or how would it work when you communicate with this person? What would you expect? We looked for areas of concern where we might take an approach that actually puts a person in a defensive mode. And so we studied all that, put together a really quick matrix. And I'll tell you from just so what did that do for us standpoint, I would say, unless Mike, maybe you can chime in too, but I would say that the information we went into that meeting with was highly, highly accurate. And it allowed us to hit the ground running instead of being in that position that I think you can get into where you think somebody might have a certain disposition or style based on the position that they have. This guy's the CFO, so he must be more of a C. And you find out he's actually an I, and he's probably the anomaly of CFO that you'd ever meet. But having that insight allowed us to prepare for that person with that type of disposition. So we didn't waste a lot of time putting together a lot of spreadsheets and things we would normally think a CFO would be interested in. We met that person where we thought they would be, but then also kept an open mind to say, okay, if there's nuances to this individual, and I think this is one thing that happens when you internalize something like Crystal, is that self-awareness and also the awareness of others, is that knowing when you're not getting the vibe back or you're just not thinking about it correctly, you can very quickly recognize when you're off track and then pivot how you're communicating and recognize, based on the feedback and interaction I'm having with that person, I probably need to maybe go a little more in the C direction or a little more in the I direction. And it was very helpful for us. And I think once we wrapped up those meetings, looking back, I think if we didn't have that information to help facilitate those conversations, we probably would have spent a lot of time guessing how to communicate with the person. So from a personal perspective, a big thank you for that platform.
Well, I'm glad that could help. I love hearing stories like that.
Drew, I know I'm really interested in what we've talked about today. I know others are as well. Where can we find out more about you and more about Crystal?
You can just go to our website, crystalknows.com. Knows, not NOSE. Frequently confused. I'm thinking about buying that and actually just starting a prosthetic nose company. But you have no idea how many people actually go to that site thinking that's us. And we're on all the other platforms. Us on Twitter, and I'm at Drew D'Agostino on Twitter. And you can get in touch with me at drew@crystalknows.com. Pretty easy person to get a hold of if you have any questions.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Mike and Mike. And if you have a listener question you would like Mike and Mike to answer on the show, we want to hear it. You can just send an email to hello@catalystsale.com, and then we will feature your question on an episode of this show. Thank you so much for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.